It was 100 years ago this morning. 100 years ago this morning that the first class Morehead Normal School, an orphan girl by the name of Annie Page, showed up for class. She was met by Phoebe Button, her son Frank, the first two faculty members. The history tells us that a second student came but didn't stay. So Annie Page became student number one.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Morehead. Happy birthday to you. To me, the greatest significance of this meeting this morning is the emphasis which is being placed on the heritage of Morehead State University. Nations, institutions, and individuals fall into difficult times when they ignore and deny their heritage. The strength of the ancient Hebrew nation fell into difficult times when it failed to recognize its heritage. The enemies of Father Abraham had filled the wells which he had dug in Gerar, and it fell the lot of his son Isaac to redig wells. The leaders of this great nation were warned constantly to remove the ancient landmarks. To me, the heritage of this great institution of learning and this reputable community are very closely related. I'm confident that the county of Rowan and the city of Morehead would have followed an entirely different direction had it not been for the fact that Morehead Academy was founded in 1887. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a meeting of the Kentucky Historical Society in Louisville. I chose as my subject, a light in a dark place, in talking about the heritage of Morehead State University. One of the senior citizens in the audience was a member of the Kentucky State Militia, which was ordered at that time to come to Morehead to establish and maintain law and order. This old soldier contributed much to the discussion which followed my presentation. And about the same time, the Kentucky Missionary Society of the Christian Church decided that it was far better to solve the problems that existed at that time through Christianity and education than through the power of the militia and the bullets which they carried in their guns. And so it was indeed into this dark place that the lamp of learning was lighted 100 years ago. And many of you know I have lived 78% of the time since the university began. 13 years longer than it became a state-assisted institution of higher education, and served as president for nearly 23 years of its history, which is almost a fourth of that time. This is why I'm so jealous of the heritage of the institution and so anxious that its future be enhanced. And so it is good this morning to see many of you who were here before I came and before anybody else came, because you were busy at the task long before any of the leadership of this university appeared on the scene. But we do select from among those who have been on the journey with us individuals, as our speaker this morning, who is capable of taking us back to the beginning in dramatizing the illustrious history of a university which came from a mustard seed origin to take its place among the eminent regional universities of America. He needs no introduction to you, because you knew him well when he lived among us, as I knew him personally and intimately when he lived among us. He has been and still is the kind of fellow upon whom you could depend and can depend for advice and counsel and assistance in time of need. And so he made that kind of a contribution to not only the university, but to the Christian church and to this community during his stay among us. He and his lovely wife, Dolores, who is on the staff of Transylvania University now, live in Midway, Kentucky, where Roy serves as minister of the old Midway Christian Church, which was established in 1844 by L.L. Pinkerton. And so I'm delighted and honored and pleased in your happy to see him as I present to you this morning Dr. Roy Robertson. Roy?
I do intend to share with you some thoughts about Frank Button's to Morehead and about the beginnings of this wonderful university. This morning I'd like to do it from a little bit different perspective. I think perhaps you have heard about Frank Button's trip to Morehead and the beginnings and how it all started in 1887 and why. But we'll talk about that a little bit more as time moves on. But this morning I'd like to come to this place from a little different perspective, and I hope it will be clear for you as we move on what that perspective is. Before beginning, though, I would like to sincerely and prayerfully dedicate my remarks to an outstanding individual whose life spirit, whose love and talent live in my heart and in memory this day. And if I accomplish any good with my life and with the work that I do, for world or individual, then part of the accomplishment is made because something of this person lives in my life and in my memory. I dedicate these remarks to a man who was my friend and whose service to Morehead State University was unquestionably strong and powerfully talented. To you, Ron Hart, I lift up these thoughts in memory, recognizing that your service to this university lives and breathes in these walls, on these grounds, in this place, resonates in the life and work of thousands of young people in parts of the world living what they learned and experienced here at Morehead. You are that the spirit never dies, and you are unquestionably proof that together we can. I'm deeply honored to be with you this morning on this, the occasion of the celebration of 100 years passing since that October of 1887, when Frank Button welcomed the first students in the beginning of years of outstanding educational service in the Morehead region. Morehead is home to me. How could it not be? I've walked narrow streets and been splashed by cars driven by suitcasing students heading home on Fridays and sometimes on Thursdays when they could get the right class schedule. I've driven up Wilson Avenue when two of its most outstanding residents, both owning large Cadillacs, pulled out of the drive at the same time. If you think that didn't teach this preacher to pray, then you don't know what it means to be Cadillac to death on Wilson Avenue. I was present when we kicked the tar out of Eastern in that brand new stadium over in Richmond, where I sat so high I realized that what I thought was fog was actually a billowy cloud that came in below. And at the same game, our band received a standing ovation at halftime from the Eastern crowd. And I remember how sorry I felt for the Eastern band, yet to take the field, standing forlornly in the end zone, watching as their own fans cheered that great Morehead band with its great presentation. I prayed at graduation, walking proudly in cap and gown beside Dr. Adrian Dorn, whose humorous quips under his breath during that pompous march are treasures to hear. The two I'll always remember are, if we had just waited for the students to walk before we put down the sidewalks, then we'd have been a lot better off. And the second, we could sure run this school just fine if it wasn't for the students. Or was that if it wasn't for the staff, Dr. Dorn?
Students not here.
I remember with this institution the good times and the tough times. I remember fondly the times when the theme, "Together We Can," seemed to be a rallying cry for the entire educational community to work together to achieve common goals. And I remember sadly the times when special interests prevailed, when wisdom was sacrificed for power, when individuals thought responsibility meant ownership, and when progress bogged down because leadership was lost in personal goals rather than in recognizing the rights of all and the greater ongoing responsibility of the never-ending spirit that was Morehead Normal School and that is Morehead State University. But through it all, the good times and the bad times, this institution has prevailed for 100 years. Nay, not 100 years, but many more years than that. For I'm going to suggest for you this morning, historically, that the quality, intent, and value that is Morehead State University was born in an awakening that took place at least 80 years before 1887, and that was so powerful by the time that Frank Button put down roots here that no feud, no obstacle, no individual, no force could thwart the coming of this great institution with its strong and noble purpose, and could maintain circumstances that would not bring us together this morning in celebration. I also suggest for you that this awakening, this attitude so prevails today that there's no turning back to a past with a lesser intelligence. There's no possibility of failure for this place in the face of obstacles. There's no possibility of any one individual ever owning or controlling what happens on these grounds, because the intent and purpose, the eternal creativity has been set in motion, and it's bigger and more graceful and more beautiful than we can imagine. And it will not be halted. Now, in order to historically understand our roots and to understand the circumstances behind Frank Button traveling to this community to accept the first student in October of 1887, it is necessary to travel back in time to the period in Kentucky when this land was first settled. We reach back that far because it is obvious that the intent behind Frank Button's mission to Morehead was established within him by circumstances of the time that had developed 8 to 10 decades before he ever came to Morehead, before 1887 and before he ever signed that first student. It is obvious also that his spirit of evangelism, his caring for people, his desire for education, his desire for excellence were all part of a greater historical flow than the smallness of simply one man, one mission, one place. And we who are part of this excellence that is Morehead now, we who care about its past, its present, and its future, We must recognize the existence of this greater historical flow and understand that we are a part of it. We cannot control it, but we are a part of it. For it teaches us that we can never own this place, because the flow is on a level that is greater than any one person. It is eternal in nature and part of a purpose centered in a respect for life and the development of quality and excellence, certainly the noblest achievements of all. Frank Button was caught up on that stream of history and excellence, and the stream had started many years before he was born, and you here today are traveling the same waters. Let's look for a moment at the background. In 1775, under the direction of the Virginia colony, permanent settlements were established at Harrodsburg, Logan's, and Boonesboro. This was the beginning of an attempt to settle Kentucky that wouldn't turn the corner for another 25 years after the events took place that established these colonies. Many of the people came to these settlements actually believing that they were relatively safe, but of course history tells us that they were not safe at all. And because of hardships, by 1777, Logan's settlement was closed and only Boonesboro and Harrodsburg remained with less than 200 people on the frontier in Kentucky. Now, it cannot be imagined how difficult these times were. We have no idea, sitting here this morning, how difficult times were then. Yes, we remember reading in school about the toughness and danger of the Daniel Boone era, but for our purposes here today, let's point out that we cannot even believe how difficult it was to settle this new land of Kentucky. Freezing to death in the winter, dying of disease, attacked by Indians, crops failing, children dying, it was frighteningly tough. It took great faith to even think about moving from the Virginias to Kentucky, and perhaps that's why the number of new residents of Kentucky were religious people, because they needed that faith to survive. That and the fact that they were moving away from an oppressive religion in order to be free here in this new land. As you might guess, the Baptists were the first to organize here in Kentucky. But according to some accounts, even the Baptists got beat by the Episcopalians, of all things, who conducted the first worship service under a tree at Boonesboro. The Episcopalians were led in the worship service by John Lythe, who suggested in his sermon that the first laws of Kentucky should prohibit swearing and should prohibit Sabbath breaking. That ought to make Judge Bork feel real good. By the year 1800, the Baptists had been joined in this area by the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, and the Catholics, and the population of Kentucky was on the move. It had grown from a mere 200 in 1775 to over 200,000 by the turn of the century. But by 1800 also, individual and organized religion in Kentucky was on the downswing. There were problems with it. The isolated pioneer life of this land was not conducive to a spiritual life, and the close of the Revolutionary War had brought cynicism and unbelief. In 1793, the Kentucky legislature voted to dispense with prayers in its sessions, and most of the reading folk read the writings of Tom Paine more than they did the Bible, and the moral standards of the day were very confused. Dancing was a sin, but drinking or trading in whiskey wasn't. Cursing on the Sabbath was a sin, but slavery wasn't. Organized religion reflected the confusion. The Baptists had a split over slavery, and the Presbyterians had a split over, well, everything that Presbyterians have a split over. Religiously, intellectually, morally, socially, and politically, there was much confusion around the turn of the century in 1800. Now let me pause just for a moment to make a statement. You will notice from here on that I suggest for you that you are here, and Frank Button's coming to Morehead was possible because it was built very much in a religious spirit and special attitude toward evangelism that developed in Kentucky between 1800 and 1887. Keeping in mind the separation of church and state, and albeit that I am a Christian minister and this is my training, I make no apologies for these statements. For I believe historically the facts show that a unique fusion of faith and reason, a combination of evangelism and intellect, a combining of religion with good thinking, took place in certain elements of the educated folk between 1800 and 1887, And this was the tradition of Frank Button, and this is why we are here today. And as I look back at that history, I am thrilled with reading about the power of these individuals who could think, debate, talk, and reach from within and find the best in quality understanding and intellect, and at the same time combine it with a good faith and go out with evangelism in the world to make a difference in the lives of others. Beginning in 1799 in Kentucky, a religious event took place that would influence this state and you and me immeasurably. It was called the Great Revival. And it began because the common folk, the average folk living in the outback, on the fringe areas of Kentucky, were so pressed physically and emotionally and spiritually that they desperately needed emotional and spiritual release even to survive. The revival began in Logan County in 1799 under the ministry of two brothers, John McGee of the Methodist Church and William McGee of the Presbyterian Church. The revival spread all over the state and eventually reached its most famous location, Cane Ridge, that Dr. Doran and I both know about very well, in August of 1801. And you surely have heard by now of the revival of Cane Ridge. Attended by thousands coming in wagon from various areas of this state and even from Ohio, this meeting featured as many as 7 preachers, heaven forbid, preaching at once, all standing on logs in various areas around Cane Ridge, and it was said that at night the lights from the campfires could be seen as far away as Paris and Lexington, and the roar of the crowds carried as far. There were individual emotional experiences with folks dancing uncontrollably, jerking and singing, and releasing a great deal of emotional frustration and pent-up physical pressure that had been building through the hard years of this settlement. They finally had a chance to get it out. Now, with this camp meeting, some semblance of activity and homage returned to religion in Kentucky, and some unity, even though there appeared to be disunity for the next decades, came back into religion. But more important, this was an explosion that led to a birth of new religious thinking that combined religion with reason, faith with purpose, intellect with a desire to build a better world, the ability to think and apply that thinking to a faith perspective that would do something in the lives of others. This was the event that birthed evangelism with a rational step-by-step approach to matching gospel with need and thus changing world and life. And it was out of this new birth that Frank Button was educated, found purpose, was excited about what he found, and gave his life and talent to put down roots that we enjoy today, and that's why we're here. Now, how is it that a basically emotional event can birth a new age, you say, and a new way of rationally and intellectually viewing faith and service? Perhaps it is because, and we need to remember this, each age of dawning, whether it's the age of enlightenment, the age of reason, the Renaissance, or the age of which we speak, is characterized by a moment of release and dawning, when the new ideas come from somewhere within, we don't know where, and it's exciting to think where it might be, and they flow to the top, and all of a sudden they take hold on the surface and are put into practice. But suffice it to say that after the Cane Ridge event between 1800 and 1900, there grew on the religious scene a tremendously powerful number of strong, educated people who combined faith and evangelism with an ability to reason and to think. And these folk made an impact on our surrounding world. You are feeling the impact here this morning, and it started way back when this state was born. To name those people would be to name names like Alexander and Thomas Campbell, Walter Scott, John T. Johnson. But for our purposes today, I want to bring us up to where we are right here. And I lift up a name for you that Dr. Doran mentioned here from the podium, L.L. Pinkerton, a medical doctor who was baptized by Alexander Campbell in September of 1830, and who entered ministry 6 years later. A highly intelligent liberal minister who believed in mission, equality, and aid to the oppressed. And he developed an evangelistic thrust that would later influence Frank Button's own education and own desire for ministry and desire to come to this area. L.L. Pinkerton studied medicine in Ohio, where in 1836 in Carthage, Walter Scott and David Burnett convinced him to go into the ministry and leave his medical profession. In 1838, he came to Kentucky, where he began to travel all over the state with John T. Johnson, William Morton, doing evangelical work. He was educated, articulate, compassionate, intelligent, and an outstanding spokesperson for the faith. Pinkerton's life and influence would have meant little without the friendship that he developed with James Ware Parrish. For on Saturday, July 18, 1840, L.L. Pinkerton was preaching at New Union Christian Church in Woodford County, and young 25-year-old James Ware Parrish attended the service, bereaved by the recent death of his young wife. And there in that church pew, he found a friend, an answer, and in the friend, unbelievable service and an unbelievable challenge to the young men who would soon follow in his footsteps. This young man, Parrish, wrote of Pinkerton, "As soon as I heard him, I knew he had an order of mind that would not only comprehend fully my difficulty and give me the credit of honesty and candor, something all preachers cannot do, isn't that true? But could perhaps he lead me away from my fears." Pinkerton and Parrish became fast friends, and in 1844, as Dr. Dorn has said, L.L. Pinkerton became the first minister of Midway Christian Church, where he served until 1860. To give you an idea of the priorities that guided these two men, Pinkerton and Parrish, listen to this account of how they brought into being Kentucky Female Orphan School, which later became Midway College. One stormy night in 1845, Dr. Pinkerton went to the church to hold prayer meeting, but the only person who ventured out was one of his elders, James Ware Parrish. They held prayer meeting together and then sat on discussing the work of the church. Dr. Pinkerton told of his dream of a school for orphan girls, and Mr. Parrish eagerly and enthusiastically began to help him to plan to make that dream a reality. Pinkerton's resolve, faith, intellect, and ability to understand where the need was, and Parrish's financial reserve made Kentucky Female Orphan School a reality. It's no wonder that James Ware Parrish's early death at 40 not long after created a terrible loss for L.L. Pinkerton, but the loss of his friend only served to stimulate his missionary resolve. It actually increased his desire to minister to causes of importance all around Kentucky and all around the nation. Pinkerton and Parrish's influence and others in the church built a strong evangelical thrust. It was an exciting thrust that obviously influenced school and church alike. Many young men during this period were baptized into the faith at the church and went out to serve in Christian ministry. The names flow out, just one after another. I'm not going to read for you the names of the Charles Schouses, the Pinkertons, and the Ricketts, and the Moores, and the Cottingham. They just flow out, people who were excited by what they had seen. One stands out, William Allen Broadhurst, who while serving as minister of Floyd and Chestnut Street Christian Church in Louisville, carried on what he had learned at Midway in this new thrust and started the wheels turning that enabled the development of the Louisville Widows and Orphans Home that has since developed into the block campus today that's on 4th Street called the Christian Church Homes of Kentucky. Now, it was into this already developed evangelical and missionary thrust that Frank Button moved when he went to Midway with his mother Phoebe in the spring of 1880. She'd been called to Kentucky Female Orphan School to teach. Frank had yet to finish high school. Interestingly enough, Frank Button completed his school years at an all-girls school. And while no one will acknowledge it, he remains to this day the only graduate of this all-female school in central Kentucky. The spirit of challenge and faith was very strong at Midway, as strong and as challenging as it ever been over the years. And with that spirit calling to him, Frank Button chose ministry and went to Transylvania University and the College of the Bible to further his education. Something of that spirit still lives in this little archaic community. You couldn't go to Midway, and I went there in 1965 for the first time, from 65 to 70, and the evangelical thrust was almost so powerful it's more than I could feel. As a matter of fact, Dolores kept telling me, come home sometime, don't stay out working all the time, but it was so exciting to work. because the challenge was there and the evangelical thrust was there. It was so powerful, and it lives in those walls today. And I can imagine how that church, that community, that school influenced Frank Button, and the real power of the evangelical spirit touched his life. I do not need to tell you what was happening in Morehead between 1880 and 1887, do I? By now you should know, and some of you don't even talk about it. It started on Election Day in 1884 and lasted until June 22nd, 1887, when the last battle was fought. You don't need to hear the history of the feud. That's for another time and another place, but allow me to make this one comment. Facing the facts of the Round County feud are not damaging to the county or to the university. The 1800s were tough times, in every sense of the word. They were tough individually when one considers how hard it was to settle lands surrounded by unknowns from all sides. The Round County feud was a reflection of the toughness of the era and of the difficulties of settling a land where law had not quite reached a stage of strength to help folks survive. And let us remember, it's very possible, as a matter of fact, it is possible, that we would not be meeting here today if the feud had not called to a new, fresh, excited, faithful, evangelical young minister and said, "Come, we need you. People need you. Education needs you. Come and ride the waves of deeper commitment into the Morehead area. Make this your home. Make this your life's work." And come he did. Sent by the Christian Church, the Kentucky Christian Missionary Society, and funded further with money from the Christian Women's Board of Missions, Frank Button, with his mother Phoebe, set up shop, and in October of 1887, just a few months after the fighting was over, as a matter of fact, tradition tells us that the fighting wasn't over because gunshots were heard by Frank Button supposedly when he first came into this community, and the fighting was still going on nearby in a place he was visiting. But he accepted his first student here, and Morehead Normal School was born. Now recognize that while Frank Button did a lot for Morehead educationally with the founding of this great institution, as you look around and see these ladies in their beautiful outfits today, and as you go to your own churches of worship, recognize also that he wore two hats, because he never did remove his hat as a minister. It was okay in those days to do that. You could wear both hats, and nobody seemed to mind. Not only was education in turmoil in Round County during the feud, but remember, religion was in turmoil also. In the middle 1880s, all the religious folk of Morehead met in a common building, which was no church building at all. It was the county courthouse. Each denomination, they're listed the Methodist, Christian, Church of God, and some others that we don't know who they were, scheduled the room on the second floor of the courthouse for worship. And Election Day 1884 brought everything to a halt, education, but also organized worship. And regular church services, along with other town meetings, were very sporadic and disorganized. In the years that followed Frank Button's coming to Morehead, he was instrumental in helping both church and school grow and prosper, to get a foothold, a foundation here in this community, if you will. And two great institutions took hold and began to move, the church and the school. Morehead Normal School began to grow with more students and with teachers and with buildings. Money from the Christian Women's Board of Missions was continuing, and individuals like General William Withers of Lexington and Mr. and Mrs. Robert Hodson of Illinois helped to make educational opportunities even more possible. A Presbyterian minister by the name of Reverend Edward O. Garant worked to secure a church building where people could once again go for worship in the Morehead area. And he succeeded in talking Colonel John Hargis into donating the property where the Christian church now stands to be used for all Christians in Morehead. A white frame church with a bell tower was built on that spot. Didn't have any heating, some of you tell me. I won't tell you who over here has told me that was the case, but they had a pot-bellied stove inside when they first met in that building. And the Christians, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, and the Episcopalians were the first groups to share together in a common worship structure, back to the way it was before the feud. A letter written by Mrs. Frank Button tells about those days of Christian unity. She says, "The first missionary society I attended was in 1890. Mrs. Button, Frank's mother, organized it. At that time, we just had one Sunday school and one church house and only one missionary society. It was very good." Not only was it very good, but I imagine in many ways it was like Christianity was really meant to be, in a unity circumstance. But as is often the wont of Christians, one by one, between 1890 and 1915, the groups separated, and each denomination moved out to buy their own land and build their own church. And under the direction of Frank Button again, the Christian church bought the land and the building, and they remained on the original spot. And Frank Button was the Christian church's first minister, like he was the school's first president, serving it from approximately 1887 to 1892. And then we see in the records that he served the congregation again sometime between 1895 and 1901, never taking off the hat of being a minister, because to him the ability to think and the ability to reason and the ability to express one's faith, they went hand in hand. From 1900 to 1922-23, the Morehead School obviously proved its worth, because in 1922-23, Morehead Normal School started the effects in motion, where it became a state institution, and its future was indeed secure. An October 1924 edition of the Round County News speaks of the historic day this way: "Above all, in the years ahead, an effort will be made to send each Morehead teacher out with an ambition to serve his own people, with a training that will command a good salary, and a professional ideal and spirit that will make Kentucky glad that she planted a normal school at this doorway to the mountains." Frank Button became Morehead State Teachers College's first president, and some of the people here today do remember him. And I remember speaking with people like Mrs. Bob Bishop, with Ellen Hudgens, with others here who remember knowing this great man. I remember also that I knew his daughter for years and did not realize it. I went into the Yates Printing Company in Lexington and had much printing done there. And this wonderful lady by the name of Phoebe worked in the back. Phoebe Shanklin was her name. And only after moving to Morehead did I find out that this was the daughter of Frank Button. And I wish I could have known then what I know now and spent more time with her. But the power and the influence of all that's happened over those years, and how it touches me today, and how it touches us as we gather here. And it all began with a spirit that understood what it meant to think, and at the same time maintain faith that behind all of this there is a reason and there is a purpose. Now, 100 years later, there's an important message for us to hear. The message simply says, wherever and whenever progress takes place, it means that a wise individual has had a greater vision than just a vision of the self. Whenever or wherever the oppressed or disadvantaged are helped, it means that a wise individual is willing to make decisions based on human rights, human justice, and the welfare of others. Whenever or wherever great purposes are unfolding, it means that wise individuals are mentally delving in a land of ideas that are unselfish, that are not built on a desire for power, that remain unattached to the small things and objective in the large things, and that keep the welfare of all in mind while planning is in progress. My friends, you are awash on a sea of greatness. You are caught in the tide of outstanding human service and creativity, born of dreams dreamed decades ago, years ago. Those who have gone before you call out. Never lose your wisdom. Never get caught up in a desire for power. Never think you own this institution or anything that you have that you call your own. And never take personally every little decision that is made on this spot. Row together on the stream of creativity. Row together by each person taking responsibility for their own task and assignment. And above all, admit down in your own heart that whatever agnostic sermon that you deliver, whatever agnostic thought or atheistic thought comes out of your mind and heart, that really you believe with faith in a Creator that is great and that has given us this place, that really there is within a deep sense of faith in the human spirit and creativity, and combine that with your ability to think to make this place continue to be great. You have a president today who I can assure you has nothing other than the good of this institution in mind for work and service. You have a past history in which you have people like Dr. Doran, Dr. Norfleet, and others who have nothing but the goodness and the welfare of this institution in mind. Now's the time to go for it. I really do agree that together you can. Frank Button thought so. He came down here by himself to make it happen. Think about now what together we can accomplish for the future. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I love you very much.
Roy, I have heard a lot of speeches on this subject and have made some right good ones myself. But I have never heard anybody at any time, anywhere, do a better job of this subject than you've done this morning. It's been tremendous. And Keith, if you would let a emeritus order you, I want you to steal some paper somewhere and ask Roy to have the script and duplicate it, because I and others will want a copy of it. I'm not as guilty of plagiarism as Senator Biden, because if I had been charged as he was, I would have had to have resigned from the presidency of Morehead for that period of time. But I doubt if any of us know anything that we have not gotten from somewhere else and somebody else, but used our unique style, as Dr. Robertson did this morning, to put it together.
Oh, this is a great day for Morehead State University. We think often of people like Phoebe and Frank Button and all the other educational pioneers in Morehead, including the Lappin family and Allie Young and family and others. But as I sat here this morning and looked across this audience, and I know almost every one of you, I know that each of you, if we had time to tell the story, has made a special contribution to this university, and we appreciate that. Roy, I don't know how one ever thanks a person for the preparation and the research and the marvelous delivery that you made for us this morning, but we're indebted to you. And Adrian, we're indebted to you to serve as our master of ceremonies. Now, you people need to know that last night I took Adrian over to the house and we spent a couple hours rehearsing. You know, Adrian hasn't done this very much. And the biggest problem we had was with his level of confidence. And Adrian, you've done well this morning. We might invite you back to do it again. I don't know who we could invite but Adrian and Manon to come back. No one has contributed more to this university than the two of them, more than nearly 23 years of service, and they're continuing to serve the university. We're delighted they're here. I want to thank Buford Krager and his committee, and Keith Capus and his staff, and David Michaels and his staff for and all the other people that were responsible for making this day happen. I suppose on a special day we ought to make some announcements, and I have a couple of announcements of interest. The university has made an application to the Kentucky Historical Society for the installation of a state historical marker to identify the site of the founding of Morehead Normal School as the forerunner to Morehead State University. Here is a quarter-size replica of the plaque that's being cast for us, and on the 31st of March in 1988, when we have Founders Day, it's our intention to have a ceremony and to install this marker to declare the special history of Rowan County and Morehead and the university. Today we're launching a year's celebration for our 100th year in the business of education, 35 as a private normal school and 65 as Morehead State University. I've had a committee take a look at what we might call this year, and we're talking about entering our second century of service. That's going to be our slogan for the year, entering our second century of service. And you're going to see that theme in various signages and on our publications and on our official mail, and we're going to be celebrating through till October of 1988. And I suppose no birthday would be complete without some gifts, and this morning I'm pleased to announce that we have received 2 more major gifts. All of us are proud of the long tradition of friendly and professional faculty members on this campus, and because of the caring attitude of 5 music faculty members who perform with the Lexington Philharmonic Orchestra, and the fact that their reputations were known and their relationships were established, I'm pleased to make the official announcement that Dover and Bernice Holland of Richmond, Kentucky, and I mention Richmond, Kentucky, have given us music scores and 92 brand new musical instruments valued at $66,000. And those of you that subscribe to the Morehead News will be reading more about the details of that marvelous gift to the university. Many of you are aware that we've been awaiting the transfer of a major bequest from the estate of one of our former colleagues. In fact, for Wilma and me, our next-door neighbor. We lived across the street from Dean and Norman Tant on Wilson Avenue for many years. I wrote to Norman when I learned of Dean's serious illness, and then I corresponded with him just prior to his death. He bequested a fund to us, a gift to us, to establish a scholarship endowment to benefit students from Rowan and neighboring counties. Many of you in this room, most of you in this room, remember with great fondness Dr. Norman Tant. I'm especially proud today, being a friend, a colleague, and a neighbor, to announce today that Unidell Eldridge, a former business associate of Dr. Tant, is here to present to us the first part of the gift.
Dr. Grody, in the request of Norman Tant, the late Norman Tant and Dean Tant, I would like to present this check in the amount of $111,000 for the Dean Tant and Norman R. Tant Memorial Scholarship Fund.
Thank you very much. What What a marvelous way to remember our dear friends. The check is in the exact amount of $111,648.35. I'm sure as you came in this morning, and if you can take a minute when you leave, if you did not see the special historical displays that were put in the lobby, you will want to do so, and we want to thank Pauline Young and the Public Information Office for putting that display together for our enjoyment.
I see in it all a renewal of the spirit of fellowship and goodwill and good cheer. And nobody is trying to outdo anybody else, and nobody is trying to usurp from the present situation the great opportunity for enhancement and advancement in store for it under Nelson and Wilma Grody in the days which lie ahead. Will you stand with us, please, for our closing benediction? Our Holy Father, not only do we recognize the power of thy might and the hand of guidance which has brought us thus far, but we realize the great need we have of thee in this time and in the days which lie ahead. We close the activities this morning with thanksgivings to thee for the great influence which thou hast manifested in the lives of those who have gone on before us, and those who laid the foundation upon which we build this day. We pray thy blessings upon the hands of those who guide us in the future, that a superstructure will continue to be built, worthy of that solid and sure foundation which has been laid for us. So we pray thy blessings upon us all, and upon Nelson and Wilma and those with whom they are identified and who are associated with them in the future of our work together, and our faith and love, and our hope of reward in our doings under thy guidance and counsel. For we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.